It was supposed to be a fresh start. After 12 years of service in the Army, Ethan Carter had seen enough of the world's chaos. He had returned home with a purple heart and a longing for peace. Willow Creek, a picturesque suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neatly trimmed lawns, seemed like the perfect place to settle down. It was close to the VA hospital where he worked as a physical therapist, and the community was known for its tranquility. Or so he thought. Ethan's first week in Willow Creek was uneventful. He spent his days unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and getting to know the layout of the neighborhood. The house he had bought was modest but comfortable, with a small backyard where he planned to plant a garden. He even hung an American flag and an Army flag on his porch, a proud reminder of his service. But the peace didn't last long. One morning, Ethan found a letter in his mailbox. The envelope was crisp, with the words Willow Creek Homeowners Association printed in bold letters. He opened it, expecting a welcome note or a list of community guidelines. Instead, he was met with a cold, formal letter demanding immediate compliance with a list of violations. The violations were petty: a chip in his mailbox's paint, a garden gnome that didn't fit the neighborhood's aesthetic, and most baffling of all, his Army flag, which was deemed inappropriate for the community's uniform appearance. At the bottom of the letter was a signature: Margaret Hargrove, the HOA president. Ethan frowned. He had heard of HOAs being strict, but this seemed excessive. He decided to ignore it, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But the next day, as he was VYing for work, he saw her. Margaret Hargrove stood at the end of his driveway, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing his property. She was in her late 50s, with perfectly coiffed hair and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. She wore a tailored blouse and slacks, and her expression was one of thinly veiled disdain. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clipped. "Have you read my letter?" Ethan nodded. "I have, but I don't see how my flag is a problem." Margaret's lips tightened. "It's not just the flag. Your mailbox is an eyesore, and that garden gnome is. Well, let's just say it doesn't fit the character of our community." Ethan crossed his arms. "With all due respect, ma'am, I've just moved in. I'll fix the mailbox, but the flag stays." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she said before turning on her heel and walking away. Over the next few weeks, the tension between Ethan and Margaret escalated. She began patrolling the neighborhood daily, looking for any excuse to issue fines. Children were scolded for playing too loudly, and neighbors were fined for in the wrong shade of curtains. The once friendly atmosphere of Willow Creek turned toxic, with residents whispering about Margaret's growing tyranny. Ethan, however, refused to back down. He had faced far worse in combat zones, and he wasn't about to be intimidated by a petty HOA president. He hung a second, smaller Army flag on his fence, a quiet act of defiance that didn't go unnoticed. One evening, Ethan returned home to find a new notice pinned to his door. It was from Margaret, threatening legal action if he didn't remove the flags and comply with the HOA's demands. The letter ended with a chilling line: "You will regret testing our authority." Ethan felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about a flag anymore. It was about control, and he wasn't going to let Margaret bully him or anyone else in the neighborhood. The situation reached a boiling point when Ethan woke up to the sound of banging on his door early one Saturday morning. He opened it to find two police officers standing on his porch. "We've received a complaint about a disturbance on your property," one of the officers said calmly. Ethan's stomach twisted. "What disturbance? I've been asleep all night." The officers exchanged a glance. "A neighbor reported shouting and verbal threats coming from your house." Ethan's mind raced. He realized Margaret must have fabricated the story to paint him as a threat to the community. He mentioned that the local coffee shop had security cameras pointed toward his street, which would prove he hadn't left his house all night. The officers nodded, clearly and said by Margaret's accusations, but they had to follow procedure. By the time they left, Margaret was nowhere to be seen. The incident with the police was a wake-up call for the neighborhood. Word spread quickly, and residents began to share their own stories of Margaret's intimidation tactics. One family had been fined for hosting a barbecue with too many guests. Another had been harassed because their teenage son played hip-hop music in his car. A retiree named Mr. Thompson confessed that he had paid hundreds of dollars in fines because he didn't have the energy to fight back. Ethan realized that this wasn't just about him. Margaret's reign of terror had been going on for years, and it was time for the community to stand up to her. Ethan decided to confront Margaret at the next HOA meeting. He wasn't alone. Several neighbors, emboldened by Ethan's courage, joined him. They arrived at the community center to find a room packed with residents, all eager to see how the confrontation would play out. Margaret sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyalists. She began the meeting by rattling off a list of new regulations, including stricter guidelines on flags and permission for the HOA board to inspect properties without notice. Ethan stood up, his voice steady. "Margaret, these regulations are unnecessary and oppressive. You've targeted me and others in this community for no reason other than your own need for control." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "This is about maintaining the character of our neighborhood," she snapped. "No," Ethan replied. "This is about power. And it ends today." The room erupted into chaos. Neighbors shouted their support for Ethan, while Margaret's loyalists tried to defend her. But the tide had turned. For the first time, Margaret looked uncertain. As the meeting continued, a local news reporter arrived, tipped off by one of the residents. He began asking questions about the HOA's discriminatory practices, and Margaret's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. One by one, residents stood up to share their stories. Mr. Thompson revealed that he had paid overdue lot $800 in fines for invented violations. A young couple admitted that Margaret had threatened to forbid them from building a playground for their children. Margaret tried to regain control, but it was too late. The community had found its voice, and they weren't going to be silenced. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board voted to revise its policies, and Margaret was forced to resign. The community elected a new, inclusive board that vowed to serve the residents rather than dominate them. Ethan's army flag still flew proudly on his porch, now joined by dozens of other flags as neighbors showed their support. The once toxic atmosphere of Willow Creek was replaced with a sense of unity and pride. As for Margaret, she was indicted on charges of property damage, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit harassment. The local district attorney took an interest in the case, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. Ethan stood on his porch one sunny afternoon, replacing the torn army flag with a fresh one. He felt a sense of closure. The flag now symbolized more than just his service. It stood for resilience, unity, and the power of standing up for what's right. The neighborhood had changed. Gone were the days of petty fines and intimidation. In their place were potluck dinners, movie nights, and a renewed sense of community. Ethan knew that the battle wasn't over. There would always be people like Margaret, eager to exert control over others. But he also knew that, with courage and unity, they could be defeated. As he looked out over the neighborhood, Ethan felt a swell of pride. He had faced a new kind of enemy on this quiet suburban street, and with the help of his neighbors, he had emerged victorious. The story of Willow Creek spread far and wide, inspiring other communities to stand up against bullying and prejudice. Ethan became a local hero, not just for his military service, but for his courage in the face of injustice. The once quiet streets of Willow Creek were now filled with laughter, children playing, and the fluttering of flags, American, Army, and others standing proud beside one another. Ethan's story reminded everyone that true courage doesn't always take place on distant battlefields. Sometimes it's found in our own front yards. Certainly, below is the continuation and conclusion of the story, expanding on the themes of resilience, community, and justice. This section delves deeper into the aftermath of Margaret's downfall, the healing process for the neighborhood, and Ethan's personal journey as he finds closure and a renewed sense of purpose. The days following Margaret's indictment were a whirlwind of activity in Willow Creek. The local news coverage had turned the neighborhood into a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny, and residents found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Reporters interviewed Ethan and other neighbors, asking about their experiences under Margaret's rule and how they had found the courage to stand up to her. Ethan, however, remained humble. "This wasn't just about me," he told one reporter. "This was about a community coming together to say enough is enough. We're not just a neighborhood, we're a family." The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Thompson, the retiree who had once been too afraid to speak up, worked quickly to dismantle Margaret's oppressive policies. Fines for minor infractions were abolished, and the board implemented a transparent system for addressing complaints. Community meetings, once dominated by Margaret's authoritarian tone, became open forums where every voice was heard. But not everyone was ready to move on. Some of Margaret's loyalists, though few in number, still harbored resentment. They whispered in corners, claiming that Ethan had stirred up trouble and that the neighborhood had been better off under Margaret's strict control. Ethan knew better than to engage with them. He had learned in the army that not every battle was worth fighting. Just as things seemed to be settling down, a new challenge emerged. A developer, Richard Grayson, began buying up properties in Willow Creek with the intention of building a large apartment complex. The proposal, which included high-rise buildings and increased traffic, threatened to disrupt the quiet, suburban charm of the neighborhood. Ethan and the new HOA board knew they had to act fast. They organized a town hall meeting to discuss the issue, inviting Grayson to present his plans. The community center was packed, with residents eager to voice their concerns. Grayson, a slick businessman in his early 40s, arrived with a polished presentation. He spoke of progress and economic growth, but his words rang hollow to the residents of Willow Creek. "This isn't progress," Ethan said, standing up to address the room. "This is greed. We've worked hard to build a community here, and we're not going to let you tear it down for the sake of profit." The room erupted in applause. Grayson, clearly unprepared for such resistance, tried to defend his plan, but the residents weren't having it. One by one, they stood up to share their concerns about traffic, overcrowding, and the loss of green space. By the end of the meeting, Grayson was visibly flustered. He left with a promise to reconsider his plans, but Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and the HOA board worked tirelessly to rally the community against Grayson's development. They organized petitions, reached out to local politicians, and even enlisted the help of an environmental group to highlight the potential impact on the neighborhood's ecosystem. Ethan found himself stepping into a leadership role once again, but this time, it felt different. He wasn't just fighting for himself, was fighting for the future of Willow Creek. And he wasn't alone. The same neighbors who had stood by him against Margaret now stood with him against Grayson. One evening, as Ethan was preparing for another community meeting, he received a call from an old Army buddy, Sergeant Mike Reynolds. Mike had heard about Ethan's fight through the veteran grape VYNE and wanted to offer his support. "You've always been a fighter, Ethan," Mike said. "But this time, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for something bigger. And that's what makes all the difference." Ethan smiled. "Thanks, Mike. That means a lot." The turning point came when the local zoning board rejected Grayson's proposal, citing concerns about traffic and environmental impact. The decision was a victory for Willow Creek, but it was also a testament to the power of community. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The once dead community came together in ways Ethan had never imagined. They hosted block parties, planted community gardens, and even started a neighborhood watch program to ensure everyone felt safe. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself reflecting on his journey. He had come to Willow Creek seeking peace, but he had found something even more valuable, a sense of belonging. The neighborhood had become his home, and the people had become his family. One sunny afternoon, as Ethan was hanging a new Army flag on his porch, he noticed a group of children riding their bikes down the street. They waved at him, and he waved back, feeling a swell of pride. This was what he had fought for, a community where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel welcome. As the months passed, Willow Creek continued to thrive. The new HOA board under Mrs. Thompson's leadership worked to ensure that the neighborhood remained a place of inclusive VUI and respect. They even established a scholarship fund for local students, funded by the fines that had once been used to intimidate residents. Ethan, meanwhile, found a new sense of purpose. He began volunteering at the local VA hospital, helping other veterans adjust to civilian life. He also started a community outreach program, teaching self-defense classes and organizing events to bring neighbors together. One evening, as Ethan was hosting a barbecue in his backyard, he looked around at the smiling faces of his neighbors and friends. The smell of sizzling burgers filled the air, and the sound of laughter echoed through the yard. It was a far cry from the tension and fear that had once dominated Willow Creek. Mrs. Thompson approached him, a glass of lemonade in hand. "You've done a lot for this community, Ethan," she said. "We're lucky to have you." Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'm the lucky one. This neighborhood has given me more than I ever could have imagined." As the sun set over Willow Creek, Ethan stood on his porch, watching the neighborhood come alive with the soft glow of streetlights. The once quiet streets were now filled with the sounds of children playing, neighbors chatting, and the occasional bark of a dog. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the battles he had fought, the friendships he had forged, and the community he had helped build. It hadn't been easy, but had been worth it. Ethan's story became a beacon of hope for other neighborhoods facing similar challenges. His fight against Margaret and Grayson inspired others to stand up against injustice, no matter how small or mundane it might seem. And as he looked out over the neighborhood, Ethan knew that his work wasn't done. There would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. But he also knew that, with courage and unity, anything was possible. Years later, Ethan sat on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee as the first light of dawn broke over Willow Creek. The neighborhood had changed in many ways, but its spirit remained the same. The streets were still lined with flags, American, Army, and others standing proud beside one another. Ethan's Army flag, now weathered but still flying high, had become a symbol of resilience and hope. It reminded everyone who passed by that true courage isn't always found on distant battlefields. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments, in the choices we make to stand up for what's right. As Ethan watched the sun rise, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced a new kind of enemy on this quiet suburban street, and with the help of his neighbors, he had emerged victorious. And so, in the very spot where battle lines had once been drawn, a sense of harmony now resonated. Gone were the days of fear and intimidation, replaced by community potlucks, easy laughter, and the fluttering of flags standing proud beside Old Glory. Ethan's story reminded everyone that, no matter how small
If you were the one
or
in this story,
mundane the setting,
how would you react?
true courage can
Would you
change the
stand up
world.
and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.